Welcome back to another edition of the Night Report podcast. I'm your host, Mike Broadbent. Joining me today to preview everything Maryland Rutgers football wise, Ahmed Ghafir. He is the publisher of Inside the Black and Gold. Ahmed, thanks for joining us, man.
I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, return guest. Here to chop it up again since we are now an official rival designated by the Big Ten and Venmo, their partners. Before we get into the actual matchup, though, I want to shout out our sponsor, FanDuel. This game has been a weird one this week in terms of the betting line. It opened at Rutgers minus 1.5 points favorite. And then it went to Maryland as a 1.5 point favorite. And now Rutgers is a 2.5 point favorite with an over under of 57.5. So it's all over the place, but much like both our fan bases and football programs at the moment. So just kind of high level. I think Mike Locksley is in his 7th year as Maryland's head coach. What are the vibes around the program right now? How has the season gone for you guys? It seems to be pretty similar to how Rutgers has gone, but from your perspective, just give us the pulse of the Maryland football program right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, year 7, so definitely. Fans definitely understood that going into this season there'd be a young roster, and kind of having patience with that young roster. A lot of excitement around some of these guys: Malik Washington, Sidney Stewart, Tahir Mathis, and open the season. How everyone expected, being able to go perfect 3-0 in non-conference, get a chance to kind of generate some good momentum with the road game in week 4 at Wisconsin. We're able to really win convincingly 27-10, and we're able to start to really build some positive juju nationally, start to maybe gain a little bit more validity, just kind of having that conference win going into that first bye week. And then it feels like since since halftime of the Washington game to open up the October slate, that's kind of been a different season for Maryland. Really inability to really be consistent in all 3 phases, lackadaisical offense and consistency, and inability to really run in the run game. And it seems like it's really just kind of been piling up, and obviously have not won since that Wisconsin game. So big picture, I would say that this is as close to a must-win game for Maryland this weekend. I think really, looking at where the program kind of stands, I think the ultimate dream is really to be able to get back to bowl eligibility at a minimum, to be able to pitch 4 bowl games in 5 years, and doing so the 4th time behind this young roster. That's kind of really kind of the what fans are kind of watching for if Maryland can make that. Can have that materialize, but I'd say really this weekend, and they'll close out the season at Michigan State. Really, those are the 2 toss-up games on Maryland's schedule. So I would say if things don't go well this weekend, it might get interesting in College Park. But nonetheless, this is an important one on the 2025 schedule.
Yeah, I mean, Maryland certainly was one of the early surprises in the season. I think you guys were something like 10.5 point underdogs going into that Wisconsin game. You guys dominated them from start to finish. Obviously, the 20-0 start against Washington that, just leaked away into the 4th quarter. You talked about the stakes for Maryland are sky high for this game. Same thing for the Scarlet Knights. Rutgers basically has a very, very narrow path of making a bowl this year. It's win against Maryland on Saturday and then beat Penn State in the final game of the season, because there's no chance we're beating Ohio State and Columbus. So that's just a mark it off as an L. You guys have a bit wider of a path to a bowl, but this is almost as important for you guys to make a bowl this year as it is for us. But I think more importantly, it's kind of a long term. If Mike Locksley wants to salvage his time in College Park, this game is pretty critical, right? Do you think like the Fire Mike Locksley chant might grow into a roar if he loses on Saturday?
Yeah, I would say so, just because this is kind of, again, really kind of those toss-up games. And, I mean, again, Maryland only won 1 conference game last year, has 1 conference win this year. I would say that, again, I think that they do have a chance to get Michigan State at Illinois, Michigan at home. I think both of those are tough matchups. I do think Maryland does match up better against them than they did against Indiana. But I think that this is definitely a critical one. And having the Fire Locksley chance, I think, to be specific, it came from the students. It came from the students on homecoming weekend, on their homecoming game. And again, it's year 7. And when you kind of look at some of the the issues with Maryland as to, when you say, Mike Locksley has taken this program and won 3 bowl games in consecutive years, that hasn't been done at Maryland. So why has the program kind of reached this point where there is frustration, and it's because of the inability to really move the needle in conference play. It feels like since 2021 until now, the results at the end of the day have been consistent. Granted, when you look back at 2021, 2022, you could look at some of those Ohio State, Michigan games and say that Maryland was plays away. But there's a difference in saying that in year 3, year 4, when you're starting to get your guys, they're becoming veterans, versus year 7 when Brian Kelly is fired and he 4 years at LSU, he's 20 games above 500, and he didn't win the big games, and yet at Maryland, you're losing 55-10 to an Indiana team that is behind a second-year head coach. So I think that is a kind of big picture, but again, I do think this is a critical one. Kind of dropping the needle or dropping the ball this weekend will move the needle for the fan base within the athletic department. I think it'll kind of maybe start to shift from speculation into maybe the initial talks.
Let's talk about the injury report for the Terps. Rutgers has been ravaged by injuries. What's the status with anybody who might be out for the year or might potentially miss this game on Saturday?
Yeah, I think Zahir Mathis, I think, is kind of the big one. There was kind of some optimism. So going into the Indiana game, on the defensive side of the ball, Zahir Mathis, who's a freshman edge, is stand-up edge rusher. Daniel Wingate, who's a star inside linebacker. Jalen Husky, star safety. So Husky missed the first half of last week because of targeting, but he was able to return last week. So expect him to be good. Daniel Wingate, he should be good. I think the biggest question is kind of Zahir Mathis. He was available last week, wasn't on the injury report going into kickoff, but he was listed questionable and was limited against Indiana. So I think making sure that he can kind of be a little bit more available on Saturday, I think, is kind of the big thing to watch. Obviously, Maryland has Sidney Stewart, who's probably been, I think, one of the biggest surprises in the Big Ten. Really started to build that profile locally last year when he had a senior year taken away from him at Concordia Prep. But both the Sidney Stewart and Zahir Mathis, when both of them are on the field together, you can really see the change, and you just feel the impact, the presence in that front seven, where it really adds to the pass rush capabilities under Ted Monachino. So I'd say that's the big one to keep an eye on.
Yeah, you guys have a hell of a tandem as freshmen. To be doing what they're doing in the Big Ten at their age is certainly something to be proud of and is a standout. But let's talk about the offense before we get into the defense. You're led, obviously, by another young player in freshman, Malik Washington. He kind of came in and took the reins early. What is it that you guys are, style-wise trying to do on offense, and just give us like a high-level perspective on the offense before we get into specific positions?
Yeah, I mean, Malik, really, I think going into this year, there was a lot of, and I don't want to say hype, because hype kind of feels like it's, a little bit exaggerated from reality. But, there was a lot of talk about that Malik Washington really could be as advertised and kind of show signs of not being a true freshman. And I think you did see flashes of that through the first couple of weeks in the season. He missed a lot of time during fall camp, missed both scrimmages. So that kind of hindered his ability to really get comfortable early in the season. I think you're starting to see him run a little bit more, start to get comfortable. You saw against UCLA, I believe Malik Washington did end up having the longest run of the game by a couple yards compared to DeJuan Williams. And you're starting to see a little bit more design runs. Saw it last week against Indiana. Wasn't very effective. Skill players are kind of an issue for Maryland. Shalik Knott's really burst onto the scene the first couple weeks of the season. He had 14 targets, 4 catches against UCLA for 54 yards. Was held without a catch against Indiana. Dorian Fleming, a tight end, who was really viewed as kind of an impact guy. 3 combined catches in the last 2 games. Jalil Farouk has had issues with drops essentially really all season, and I'd say Octavian Smith has really kind of been the alpha dog, and but even still, there's kind of this inability for the skill players to kind of really shine. And again, I do think Octavian Smith has kind of been the one that has done so the best. But you can't really talk about the offense without acknowledging just the complete inability to run the ball. At one point last week, going into the fourth quarter, Maryland had 17 rushing yards compared to Indiana, who finished the game with 370. So, Maryland, DeJuan Williams, Nolan Ray, both of them rank among the worst in the Big Ten in yards per carry. And so you're kind of asking your true freshman quarterback to do a lot. So you have had some of the inconsistencies and really inability to sustain momentum, which has put pressure on the defense, where the defense is just on the field. You saw it against UCLA again, where just being on the field for extended periods of time over a 60-minute game starts to wane on you a little bit. So again, I think offensively there's still a lot to figure out right now. I think it'll be interesting, early on in the season that Maryland had some capability of showing that vertical threat that a lot of fans expected that Malik Washington was capable of, but you haven't seen it as much in the last couple, 3, 4 games, I'd say. So I think it'll be interesting to see if Maryland's able to find some of that success on Saturday.
Yeah, talk to us about the style of play Malik Washington likes to play with, because I think my take, maybe not my take, but my perspective on him might have been a little skewed, because the two games that I saw start to finish from him were the Washington game and the UCLA game, where he rushed that touchdown in against Washington, and it seemed like, listening to people talk about it afterwards, it was one of the first times that he kind of like saw something and like took the not the initiative, but he used his like instincts to keep the ball in that situation. Obviously, he had 67 yards rushing on 6 carries against UCLA, but on the season, he's only been sacked twice, which is very
Yeah.
impressive for a young quarterback. But he's only got 27 rushes for 99 yards and 3 touchdowns. Talk about his style, who he reminds you of, and kind of what you've seen from him growth wise throughout the season.
Yeah, I would say kind of who he is as a quarterback, and it's interesting because I've watched Malik Washington play basketball, and I think when you kind of see a quarterback that has his ability to make plays with his legs and his athleticism on the court, I mean, he wasn't just like a random basketball player; like he was playing with Team Mello and among the highest scorers in the team. So I mean, he's an athletic piece, but when you watch him play quarterback. Um, he knows he's capable of making the plays with his legs, as you mentioned, his rushing stats, but he looks to do his damage in the pocket, and he kind of uses his legs to avoid some of that pressure to extend plays. And I'd say that's a big reason why Maryland is among the nation's best in sacks allowed, which is a big improvement from a season ago. And there's been some inconsistencies from Maryland through conference play over the years, but I think Malik Washington, his athleticism and his ability to really use that mobility to extend plays. I think that's the big thing. I thought the first couple of weeks in the season he did a really good job. Mike Loxley, he talked about it in the Wisconsin game where he had I believe it was in the first quarter, he had a post route to Caleb Webb, missed the read slightly, got the call back in the fourth quarter, hit it in stride, ended up being a big play for Shalik Knotts to push the lead to 27-3 at the time, and really put a bow on the game for Maryland's first conference win. He does a good job of picking up when he makes mistakes. He does a good job. You can see it even in games of being really coachable, of looking to be coached. I remember it was either first or second drive against Nebraska. He had a fourth down rush, and he finished just yards of the sticks. They looked at it, ended up being a turnover on downs. But as soon as the play was over, there was no pouting. There was no emotional outburst. It was immediately him and Coach Loxley, shoulder to shoulder, talking about the play. And later in the game, he kind of was able to learn from it. So you could see him pick up and start to apply things that he does learn. And again, I think that kind of when you think back at high school, when you talk to local coaches, not the coaches that really worked with him, the coaches that would have to game plan against them, you would see after the games that they would say that Malik Washington would come up and ask the types of questions that he was asking when he was a freshman and sophomore. It's the way that he approaches the game, the way that he views the game, his football IQ is a little bit different than frankly what I've seen out of Maryland quarterbacks in probably the last 10, 15 years.
Yeah, he's definitely impressed me from when I've watched him. I mean, he's also 6'5", 230. He's an absolute load. So, like we mentioned before, he's only been sacked twice on the season. Is he doing a good job avoiding sacks by having good pocket awareness, using his athleticism and mobility when he feels that pressure, or is the offensive line doing a pretty good job of keeping him safe, or is it a little bit of everything?
I'd say it's a little bit of everything and a little bit of play design. Maryland, trying to, some, screen plays to be able to get the ball out quick to some of these guys and let them make plays. But I would definitely point it to, and I should say the offensive line has taken steps in that regard. Having Damian Roblowski work with the interior offensive lineman Hal Hunter. He previously was with the Houston Texans with Pep Hamilton. He's coaching tackles and tight ends. So I'd say having that tandem does help, but the Malik Washington, his mobility, his feel, and kind of being smart largely at times with the football, I'd say that's a driving force for it.
Let's talk about the rushing lack of output for the Terps. I mean, it must have been tough last week watching Roman Henby on the other side, having a good season with the Hoosiers. What's been the primary, if you had to like point to one thing as to why the rushing game really just hasn't been able to establish itself this year for the Terps, what would you say it is?
Yeah, I mean it's very similar to last year. Run blocking has kind of been an issue, and kind of for the backs being able to hit the hole with power. You kind of saw Nolan Ray, or really the last two off seasons. His blend of vision, speed, and balance. And we've seen flashes of it. He had a 28-yard touchdown a couple weeks ago. Was Maryland's first 20-yard rush this season, and I think at this point Maryland is one of three teams or one of two Power Four teams that only has one or two 20-yard rushes this season. So the big plays just really haven't been there. But the run blocking has really been a sore spot for Maryland, which, again, obviously complete different, but just very interesting to see when especially when the pass blocking has been so good this season.
Other than Malik Washington, if you had to point to a single player on this Maryland offense as like an X factor for this game, who would it be?
Yeah, I routinely go back to him, but I'd say Dorian Fleming just because he's a guy, Maryland's efficiency, whether it's in the red zone, whether it's on third down, has really been poor the last 3, 4 games, depending on which stat you're really looking at. But I'd say kind of Dorian Fleming is kind of that guy where he's kind of can be that safety blanket to really move the sticks, be a dependable guy. Again, only having 3 targets the last 2 weeks is a little bit light of a load for him. I think kind of him being able to lean on him to kind of generate some sustained momentum. I'd say that'd be a big key.
Dorian Fleming is the sophomore tight end. He's got 29 receptions for 252 yards and 2 touchdowns on the season. If you were to point to, I think I know the answer to this, but if you were to point to like one area of weakness that you're most concerned about for this game, what would it be?
I think. Well, so I kind of go back and forth. I do think that Rutgers receivers, Dolphin Strong.
So,
I think that they're going to be.
sorry, I meant on the Maryland offense. I should have clarified.
Oh,
Sorry.
oh no, you're good. Yeah, I think kind of. Sorry, do you mind repeating the question real quick? I just got
Yeah, sorry
someone.
about that. Where would you say on the Maryland offense is like your biggest area of concern for this week?
Sure, gotcha. Sorry. Yeah, I would say for this week. Again, really putting too much on Malik Washington. I do think that there's kind of an ability to create some momentum on the ground, and as crazy as that is to say, Rutgers run defense, has shows that Maryland has some ability to create some plays. So can Maryland kind of capitalize that on that between Nolan Ray, Dewan Williams is really been a guy that they were high on out of high school, and I was there when he tore his ACL for the sidelined him for his senior year, and kind of getting back last year, and now he's really hitting his stride. But can some of these guys can they hit the home run play? I'd say if Maryland can just show flashes of that and kind of alleviate some pressure off Malik Washington, I'd say that's kind of the big thing. But again, I think that this Rutgers defense they can create some pressure on Malik, but question is can someone else outside of him step up?
Yeah, I mean, Rutgers has not been great really at any. If you look at any metric defensively, they basically haven't been good. I did some research, and Rutgers is allowing 8 yards per play in Big Ten play this year, which, if it holds up, would be the worst in this century. So, if you guys have a pulse anywhere on offense, you'll probably be able to move the ball with some level of consistency. How do you feel this Maryland offense matches up with the Rutgers defense?
Yeah, I think again, I think it'll be really interesting to see if if the ground game can get going. But I think Malik Washington kind of has an opportunity to get settled. I think that this is kind of a week for Maryland to kind of take that step. Loxley has talked about really since mid-October, improving in the red area, improving on third downs. Last week third downs at three of 12. I believe it's only 3 touchdowns in the last 14 red zone attempts since the start of October. So I think that there's an opportunity for Maryland to kind of improve that, and I think it's kind of up to the skill players, but I think offensively that there's an opportunity for Maryland to get some positive mojo going.
Let's switch over to this Maryland defense. Like you mentioned, the two edge rushers are absolute studs. You got a ball hawking secondary from a high level. What's like the defensive philosophy, and just kind of talk about the success that you guys have had on the defensive side this year?
Yeah, Ted Monachino, fast, physical, relentless. Excuse me. And yeah, I mean, you see a little bit of a healthy blend of veteran and young talent. Jalen Husky, Daniel Wingate, both those guys have played a lot of football. Jalen Husky, probably Maryland's highest draft caliber NFL draft caliber prospect on this year's roster. And then again in that front seven, I think this is probably the first time that Maryland's had multiple pieces in that front seven. I think Trey Reddick kind of being able to expand and being a little bit more versatile, moving as an inside backer as well. I think that has been able to help. Cindy Stewart, he's been as advertised. Was really a guy. I mean, even before he stepped foot on campus, he had a controversial ruling that sidelined him for his senior season. So, I mean, he took right advantage of it, went right into the weight room, and he just blew up. I mean, he was a grown man as a 17-year-old, which was crazy. So he's been as advertised, and again, I think that the multiple pieces in this front seven, kind of being able to disrupt opposing teams, I think has been impressive.
If you had to point to who the best player is on the defense, who would you kind of anoint, regardless of how old they are? Because there's a lot of good options.
Yeah, that is tough. I feel like my gut says to say Sidney Stewart to hear Mathis. I feel like it is slightly disrespectful to Daniel Wingate, but I'll go Jalen Husky, just because he's so reliable on that back end. He's your most veteran guy, period, on the roster. Doesn't have the most consecutive starts on either side of the ball, but most consecutive starts on the defensive side of the ball. And again, he's the way he's able to kind of settle in that secondary, the way he's really able to get this defense locked in as a whole, I think is big. Excuse me. So I think he's kind of the big one, but I wouldn't say that it's a big gap. I would say all those guys I mentioned, Dante Joyner, Jamari Glasker, both those guys have looked good at corner. There's a couple pieces, but I'd say that this defense as a whole is just playing together very well.
Yeah, and your stats they speak for themselves. Top 20 in turnover margin, top 20 in sacks, number 2 in the nation in interceptions. Have those kind of come in bunches, or have they been pretty widely distributed throughout the games? Or, even you guys have lost 4 straight, but 3 of those 4 were one-score games, and you were leading in most of them. So have the turnovers and sacks kind of fallen off, or is it still there? It's just the offense hasn't been able to come through.
The sacks haven't been as consistent. I mean, the turnovers. Maryland, they opened the game last week with the turnover
Yep.
on Mendoza. Set the offense up in the red zone and couldn't capitalize. Settled for a 24-yard field goal. But the interceptions, I think Maryland has recorded at least one in every game but one this season. So I'd say the pressures, the sacks, being able to register those have kind of dropped off and maybe not been as consistent over a 60-minute stretch, but the pressure has still been there. Again, like you said, the turnover margin has been a big reason for Maryland to kind of be consistent the way that they have been this year. But last week was the first game all season where they lost that, so it's been sure a big piece in Maryland staying in the game again. The week prior, 2 weeks prior, the game prior to the Indiana loss, UCLA, Maryland took the lead off a Jamari Glasgow interception when the offense couldn't do anything. So I'd say those pieces have kind of helped give Maryland momentum in key moments really throughout the season.
Or would you say the biggest area of concern with this Maryland defense against the Rutgers offense is?
Yeah, I would say tackling. And I do think got confused earlier, but I do think that the KJ Duff and Ian Strong, I think them going against this Maryland secondary, I think it'll be really interesting. Dante Joyner, Jamari Glasgow, both those guys. Joyner, super athletic. Glasgow, very technically sound. I think statistically, Glasgow is having the better of the year, but it really does feel like a 1A, 1B type deal. I think both those guys, I think it's going to be a fun matchup. But the biggest concern is probably going to be the front seven and being efficient in the front seven. He had 24 missed tackles against Nebraska. It's had 17 against Indiana. And again, we mentioned Indiana had 367 rushing yards after Mendoza kneeled out the game. So I think it was 369 officially, but before that. But against Nebraska, the Emmett Johnson just really tore through Maryland's defense, especially down the stretch, to solidify the game in the fourth quarter. And like you mentioned, in this 4-game slide, Maryland's had a fourth quarter lead in every single one of the first 3 losses. And the inability to tackle consistently has been a reason why Maryland has lost some of those games late. So I think it'll be kind of interesting to see if Maryland can do that against Antoine Raymond. I know statistically, he's among the Big Ten's best. I think he's third in the Big Ten in rushing yards, even though Rutgers is somehow at the bottom of rushing yards. So I think it'll be kind of interesting to see how he does, and he kind of if he's able to capitalize on Maryland, and if those tackling problems come up. Head coach Mike Locksley was kind of open about the fact that with the young team, you're trying to stopgap and try and plug holes while you can, and I don't know that that's the most efficient strategy in terms of you kind of normally don't want problems to resurface 2-3 weeks later, but I'm not paid millions to be a head coach, but. Yeah, I think if Maryland can't do that on Saturday, I potentially could see a high scoring game.
Yeah, I mean the books seem to agree. With the over under being
Yeah,
set
that's
at
fair.
57.5. The thing that I had a specific question about was that Rutgers passing game is really about rhythm and timing, and it's really like super reliant on like those 15-yard out routes, those slants, and they've struggled. Like if you look at the Iowa game, they had a ton of production early on in that game. Phil Parker then switched up to like a bump and run, press man style, and that really threw off the Rutgers passing game. Washington played us like that, and we weren't able to get things consistently going. Last week, Illinois played us really close, and was really physical with our receivers. Is Maryland a physical secondary, or are they more of a finesse secondary, or can they do a little bit of both?
Yeah, I would say. I mean, they can do a little bit of both, but I would say definitely, the 2 portal cornerbacks that they added, Jamari Glasgow, Dante Joyner, this offseason or last offseason, kind of allowed Maryland to kind of be a little bit more physical. So yeah, Maryland definitely has the capability to play that bump and run a little bit. But again, I think, you know, 6'6" receiver. I think it'll be interesting to see, how Jalen Husky and Messiah Delhomme, who's a true freshman who rotates in a lot. I think both those guys will play key roles, but I think Maryland does have that athleticism to mix it up a little bit.
Let's transition to the third phase of the game, special teams. Talk about, the special teams of Maryland. How's your place kicking been this year? Coverage, punts. Have you guys allowed any big plays in the special teams?
Maryland has done a good job in coverage largely. They have a really good punter, Bryce McPherson, among the nation's best. Sean O'Hare does a really good job. I think he's missed 2 field goals this year. And he joined the program from Richmond, went 12 for 12 last year, 11 for 11 last year. So perfect. And I would say his kick line seems to be within that 50-yard range, and it feels like 50 is kind of right on the cusp. I would say the big question for Maryland is kickoffs, and it has been a question really all season. Maryland, the concerns really showed up week one, and it seemed like Maryland was able to kind of address it in week two, but haven't really been able to consistently get it into the end zone. Philip Noyes, he's taken over those kickoff duties with Sean O'Hare, kind of working through the leg power aspect of it, and again, still a redshirt freshman, but really Maryland, frankly, under Mike Loxley, they've never really posed a threat in terms of creating a big play in special teams. So that's kind of always been a glaring weakness or inability, or lack of doing. I guess maybe not inability, but I'd say the specialist McPherson, O'Hare, definitely a lot of confidence in those guys.
I wanted to go back quickly to the offensive line talk because in looking at like the PFF grades, it's kind of stark where you guys are seventh overall in pass blocking as a team, but you're 134th overall in run blocking. Is that is that basically the scheme trying to get passes out really quickly? Is it that you guys are really just designing to keep the pocket open for Malik and have is your offensive line like not the bulkiest group? Like, what would you kind of pinpoint as to why you're so good at pass blocking but support run blocking?
Yeah, I mean, my Maryland center, Mike Hershey. Obviously, you never need your centers to be the biggest guys, but a little bit of a undersized guy. Alan Huron transferred over from D2, but he had a really good off season to kind of really solidify himself as that starting red tackle for the second straight season. Lou Bob was really the guy that you kind of needed him to take that next step, and run blocking wasn't an area of strength for him a season ago. Rachel Perry, he's come in to kind of take over that left tackle spot. Another D2 transfer. And then Isaiah Wright actually started his career over at Rutgers,
Yep.
and he's probably been Maryland's best offensive lineman, I'd say, this year. Even last
Wow.
year going into it, I remember it was his third practice when he got here towards Achilles, and he was really viewed as a big loss for that offensive line, and was viewed as a big addition for this offensive line again. But yeah, I'd say kind of getting those guys kind of transitioned, and just has not been smooth. But again, I'm not sure that I've seen Maryland's offensive line enjoy that varied levels of success in pass versus run blocking.
Do you have any questions for me about Rutgers, whether it be offense, defense, special teams, before you get into our predictions here?
Yeah, I would say actually offensively for you guys. I mean, for Rutgers, where do you kind of see is maybe the biggest question mark, maybe the biggest X factor to going into Saturday?
Um, so Rutgers had to reshape its offensive line a little bit again last week. Taj White, the starting right tackle, got hurt at the end of the game 2 weeks ago, and last week he didn't play, so they had to play their fourth string left tackle. That's Mashoud Giwa, who's a transfer in from LIU, because they shifted their starting left tackle Tyler Needham to right tackle, and that didn't really go so hot for Rutgers. They weren't really able to run the ball very well against Illinois. Last week against Illinois, really the offense kind of bottomed out. They basically got held without a touchdown until very late in the game. So and they're famously not the best offense, or sorry, not the best defense. They were statistically one of the worst in the Big Ten. You guys certainly have a significantly better defense than the Illini. My concern is that if you guys are able to kind of mug up our outside guys, similar to how Washington was or how Illinois was, I think that kind of takes away a big element of what a winning game for Rutgers would look like. Because you guys are very opportunistic on defense. You force a lot of turnovers. You get to the quarterback a lot. Ethan's been sacked a ton. So, I mean, there's a lot of areas of concern right now for Rutgers offense going against this defense. And I think with my prediction, you'll kind of understand where I'm leaning towards this. But yeah, offensively, I think there's a lot of areas of concern right now for Rutgers. They haven't been great in the red zone. They have one of the lowest red zone efficiency rates in the country. They had all these hot starts early on in the season where they were, scoring in bunches, and then the middle of the game got stodgy. That hasn't been the case the last few games. They haven't been able to put the ball in the end zone when they've gotten down there. So there's for as gaudy as the Rutgers offensive numbers look, just from a high level, they have not been very efficient whatsoever.
Yeah, I think that is actually a pretty good point. But yeah, I think just Merrill's done a good job kind of taking away some of these plays downfield. So I think it'll be interesting to see, yeah, how the secondary is able to play and kind of limit the two Rutgers receivers like you mentioned.
Um, you got any others before we get into our prediction?
Let's dive into it.
All right. So, like I said earlier on FanDuel, Rutgers is a 2.5 point favorite right now, 57 point over under. Um, you're our guest, Ahmed. I'm going to let you give your prediction first. How do you see this game going down? What's your score prediction for this one?
Yeah, I last week I decided that I was gonna go. I can't pick Maryland to win until I see them win, but I do have a little bit of a weird feeling against in this one. Again, this is as close to a must win as it gets. I have it at 34-28 Maryland. I think that this offense kind of has a chance to kind of get it going a little bit, and like I said, really be able to establish some of this chemistry and. I think Malik Washington, he's probably coming off of his worst game as a Terp for as a young freshman. I think he's going to bounce back strong.
Yeah. So, this one's tough for me because you guys do more things well than Rutgers does. You've had more close games this season, more competitive games, more games that realistically, you flip the coin 10 times, you guys might win at least half of those games that you lost. Rutgers, you can't say the same for. Rutgers, you could say that maybe for the Iowa game and for the Minnesota game, but for their last three losses, there's been a lot of non competitive football. This defense is biblically bad, all time historically bad, and they have done a lot of things to shake things up, and none of it's really worked. So, from my perspective, I don't really see a reasonable path to a victory for the Scarlet Knights outside of doing things significantly differently than they've attempted to all season. I've I've criticized them for not using a ton of motion. They have the lowest motion rate, pre-snap motion rate in the Big Ten by almost a factor of 3. I think they only run pre-snap motion on about 8% of their passing plays. Second lowest is Michigan State at like 25% roughly. Um, I just it's going to take things that Rutgers hasn't really done all season. It's going to take us forcing turnovers. It's going to take us showing that they can stop a mobile quarterback, which they haven't. There was a stat from this season where we faced like 6 like mobile quarterbacks like from the FBS level that we knew were mobile quarterbacks, and we've allowed on average like 85 yards rushing on 9 attempts and 1.3 touchdowns per game to those quarterbacks, 9 yards a carry. So there's just a lot that points to Rutgers not winning this one. The only thing that would point me to maybe Rutgers wins is if Maryland like truly just like has a meltdown and like the losing has caught up to them and they just don't really have anything left in the tank. And maybe you can be a better person to answer that. Do you feel like that's kind of like the psyche of the team right now, or do you think that they're fired up for this?
Yeah, I think they're letting really the outside noise be the outside noise, and I think that the locker room is a lot better in a lot better spot than it was a year ago. So I don't think that the losses. I mean, nobody likes losing, and it obviously it dampens a little bit, but it's not to the point where everyone's kind of playing for themselves, everyone's looking for themselves. So I do think that there is a little bit more of the fired up than fragmented locker room, and just get to the end of it.
All right. Then my prediction will be Rutgers loses this one 31-24. It pains me to say it, but I think Maryland's the better team, and I think both teams will be desperate. It's just that you guys do more things well than we do, and ultimately, um, usually the teams that have more strengths and have better line play win the games, and you guys have both of those. So, Ahmed, you've been gracious with your time. I want to thank you for coming on. But where can our listeners find your work, and where can we find you on social media?
Yeah, appreciate you having me on. You can find me find all of our work over on InsideTheBlackandGold.net. You can follow me on Twitter or X at Ghafir the Turtle. You can follow us on Inside Black and Gold on Instagram, and we got all your Maryland football, basketball, non-rev, and recruiting news. So definitely, like I said, definitely appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, no problem. You've been great once again. He does a really good job with his work, so definitely check him out if you want to hear the Maryland perspective on anything Terrapins athletics. But that's it for today. Thanks everybody for listening. This has been another edition of the Knight Report podcast. Signing off.